All right, well, welcome everyone to the Sports Guys. I'm Tom.
And I'm Rob.
We're really happy to have you back this week. We want to build on top of the podcast we did last week where we broke down Super Bowl 58 between the 49ers and the Chiefs. And it was quite a game. But before we start getting into that breakdown this week, we want to have you like this video and please subscribe to our channel. It really helps us grow our channel and grow our reach to all of you. And we have a lot of really good content coming. So we're excited about that. We would love for you to take this journey with us. So anyway, let's just get overall impressions of the game right off the bat. Rob, what did you think? I thought it was a great game. I really despise the games that are blowouts. You know, people turn them off at halftime when it's 39-3. And this one didn't disappoint. We knew it would be a competitive game, and it was exciting all the way through.
Very much so. I think it was one of the closest Super Bowls I've ever seen. It was kind of back and forth, a lot of good defense. Score-wise, it was never more than one score out of reach for either team. So at no point did it feel like either team was out. But that was also if you were rooting for a team, your team was never really in control either. So
True.
Very exciting Super Bowl. And I think even though a lot of people are coming away from it sort of not feeling like it was successful because it was low scoring relatively, I do think that it was super close in talent level, performance, etc. So the score reflected how kind of it was just a battle.
No doubt about it. You know, I was sitting in your living room watching it with you, and that was really a cool thing. We haven't watched it together in a couple of years, and we're all kind of hanging on the edge of our seats. And when you do that, you know it's a really great game. You don't know what's going to happen next. So a little bit of jitters in the beginning of the game. You had both teams have a turnover very early on their first drives. You know, both teams playing really, really solid in the first half. I think the 49ers surprised me how well they were playing. They really kind of dominated the first half overall. Defense wasn't giving up anything. But anything you want to discuss from the defensive side of both sides of the ball, how they played, anything surprise you, or did it go exactly what you thought?
I thought first half Niners defensive line did a nice job. I felt like the Chiefs offensive line was holding up pretty well, but they definitely had their hands full. And I do feel like the Niners dominated the first half in some ways, or in many ways. However, when you looked at the scoreboard, it wasn't reflecting there. So that's really unnerving for a team to be beating on another team in both trenches, really, in the first half. And the score is right there within a strike. So, you know, it was interesting. Definitely the Niners ran the ball pretty effectively in the first half. They gave a pretty decent dose of McCaffrey. And Pacheco got some runs. I was actually a little surprised that he didn't get more, but I really felt like the Chiefs were kind of feeling the Niners out a little bit, and also figuring out what adjustments they wanted to make as they saw everybody live. Of course, the Chiefs secondary was even better than I thought they were going to be, which was difficult because I already knew they were probably the best corners in cover corners in football, but they were impactful. They were incredible. So
it really felt like both defenses had a lock on the offenses in the first half. That's how it felt to me. Both offenses are having a hard time moving the ball. Even the 49ers touchdown ended up being a trick play. You know, they felt like midway through the second quarter that they were frustrated. They were only up 3-0, and they'd been dominating the game. So they ended up going to a trick play where Jennings throws a pass back play to McCaffrey, who then eventually gets free and scores the only touchdown of the half. So really did feel like the defenses dominated the first half, and that going into halftime, they had both executed their game plans really to perfection. They controlled each other's offenses. And you're right, McCaffrey, out of his 22 carries, got 20 of those carries in the first half, and so he was pretty much, you know, pretty dominant when it came to getting most of the touches in that half. So what about the offensive game plans? Anything surprising there in the first half and even in the entire game?
Actually, I thought they were going to try to utilize Kittle and Juszczyk a little bit more to see what they could do other than test those corners. And I was very surprised that how much they dropped Purdy back to throw. It's almost like they said, we don't care how good their corners are, we're going to go for it. And I thought that was a tactical error. I think what you do is you pound the ball and you make those corners, keep looking into the backfield, and then eventually you're going to pop open. So I think they set out to run the ball, and I'm not sure they did it quite enough in the first half. McCaffrey only had 22 rushes in the whole game, and he had 6 of those in overtime. So I think first half he had something like 12 rushes or something like that. But
I think it was 15, I believe. It was quite a few first half.
well, wasn't it? No, it was he had 2 rushes in the third quarter, and then the point is that he ran an okay amount in the first half, not quite enough, but enough, decent. And then second half they threw out the playbook basically. So
in looking at what we got right and what we got wrong from last week, we talked about the 49ers to attack this defense. They needed to go underneath and not try to go to the wide receivers, because the strength of the KC was their DBs, their lockdown corners. And instead, they seem to keep trying to go to Ayuk and keep trying to go to all the other receivers they've got, Jennings, et cetera. Instead of going to Kittle, instead of going to McCaffrey. They did go to McCaffrey a couple of times through the air, but didn't go heavily underneath like I thought they would.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be constant checkdowns until the corners started to get more or the wide receivers got more separation, but Purdy just kept, the plays kept calling for Purdy to drop back and try and go down the field, and I didn't really understand the game plan, but it was semi-okay because they were running effectively. I felt like the Chiefs were throwing too much too. There was a lot of pressure. I felt like Nick Bosa was outstanding in the first half.
He really was. And, they were talking about maybe MVP. He was kind of on that MVP trajectory the way he was playing.
Yeah, the whole defensive line for San Fran came to play, especially in the first half. And I feel like there was definitely a little bit of a domination, although you could tell that halftime adjustments were coming and that it was going to – the fact that it was one score was just not going to be enough to hold up. So, second half, totally different animal.
Yeah, in terms of the first half, just to finish that up, Kansas City looked completely flustered. I'd never seen Mahomes so frustrated. Every time he came to the sideline after a 3-and-out or after a short drive with nothing and a punt, he just looked completely flabbergasted. You had Travis Kelce with 1 catch for 1 yard in the first half. I don't know if 49ers could have done a better job on him. You had a Kelce Andy Reid incident where Kelce bumped into and yelled in his face and almost knocked him over. He was so frustrated with the with the fumble that happened.
He was furious that he got pulled off the field in order to call a Pacheco run, and on that play was when Pacheco fumbled. So Kelce felt like he needed to be out there and that he wanted to be out there in future running plays. So that's why he felt so passionate about it, because the fumble had just happened. And obviously he's been very apologetic about it, and he admitted that it was just passion taking him to a bad place. But clearly they were flustered, frustrated, not pleased with how it was going. They knew they were going to have to score some points against the D, and they were going to have to make some adjustments at halftime, which they did some.
And yet they kicked a field goal right near the end of half to make it 10-3, and you just felt to yourself in the back of your mind, this is one of the best quarterbacks of all time. It's a one-score game. They've been thoroughly outplayed, and you have to think they're not going to get thoroughly outplayed in the second half. And 49ers should have been up 17-3 or more. I mean, the way they played the first half. So as we discussed last week, one of the reasons I picked the Chiefs 24-23, very close game, was because you had Andy Reid, one of the GOAT coaches, and you had Mahomes, who may be the second best ever, at least at this point. And so I just couldn't root against them. And one of the reasons was their halftime adjustments. They've been doing it all year. What were your thoughts about when the two teams came out in the third quarter, how they looked, and some of the adjustments they made?
So I thought the Kansas City's adjustments were more gradual and smaller. They were good ones, but they weren't extremely pivotal. What happened was defensively, they decided to start blitzing more, and that really impacted Purdy and caused them to really pay the price, because they all of a sudden just started throwing nonstop. And offensively, they started to realize that the Niners had decided they were going to start playing zone and start also blitzing from a zone. So that was music to their ears. Nobody loves to be blitzed more than Mahomes. And honestly,
And Tom Brady
they,
and all those
they
guys
played
love it, loving you
they
blitz them.
played
You know,
right in they
I
played
really,
right into
I really wonder if Purdy in his fifth or sixth year with a lot more experience would be like Mahomes and really love when you blitz him, because that
I
actually
don't
opens up lanes.
it's not Purdy. The play calls were not taking into account that they were blitzing. They kept calling these plays that were down the field, and they take a long time to develop. It was really on the coaches. The offensive coaches who were working together were calling, 15-yard plays that were taking 4 seconds, and
Mhm.
Purdy was getting 2.5. And it,
They
it,
kept trying to force it into Ayuk, force it into Debo Samuel,
yeah.
and they did get it to Jennings on one touchdown play. But yeah, you're right. They were trying to go downfield with it and didn't really have that kind of time. They need to go to the hot routes.
Yeah, and so Purdy's taking a lot of heat for how he played. He actually played really well with a bad game plan in the second half.
Agreed.
First half was
Agreed.
pretty good, and second half, hey, drop back every play, and Chris Jones is coming at you, and we're gonna try to throw, 15-yard slants and stuff, and we're not even gonna usually have a check down for you. There were very few times where McCaffrey was actually a check down. So
Mhm.
I was scratching my head at the game plan on really San Fran's bad game plan was more significant than anything the Chiefs did. The Chiefs realized now we can work Kelsey in because he's amazing against the zone. And Mahomes loves the zone, and Mahomes loves being blitzed also.
You
So
haven't talked about that, except you did talk to me off camera about the adjustments San Francisco's defense made. And Steve Wilkes, by the
yeah,
way, who just got fired this week, and how they played basically man the entire first half, completely shut down the Chiefs, and then went to largely a zone in the second half, which is what the Chiefs
yeah.
love. That's what they eat up. So why do you think they did that?
It's inexplicable. There's no good reason for it. The only reason you do that is against a rushing quarterback. And Mahomes is not really a rushing quarterback. He's plenty quick enough, and his rushing yards actually played a huge role in this game. But you don't need to keep an eye on the backfield when they're not running Pacheco very much, and he doesn't rush very often. You need to play. San Fran needed to play very simple man-to-man coverage, rush with four, which is what they were doing in the first half, and they were getting home. They were getting there with four guys. However, there needed to be a spy for Mahomes, and that would have bottled them up, I think.
And by the
Instead,
way, and by the way, Greenlaw was the spy for Holmes, and he got hurt on a non-contact play, which was really unfortunate. And I really believe that was one of the turning points in the game. There were several, but one,
probably
all the 49ers players said that Greenlaw, he was kind of the spy the whole game for Mahomes. And as
right.
soon as he went out, his replacement clearly was, not the all-pro player he is.
So Kelsey started getting catches, and it opened up a lot of things from there. And they were blitzing, and Mahomes would make them pay. And sometimes he'd even slip out of it and run for 15-yard, and a touch and a first down. So he was single-handedly moving the chains sometimes. And it just, I mean,
And
it's
he'd find, and then he'd find Ray Rice coming in a drag route across, and he just always had somebody
yeah,
open. It seemed like in the second half.
yeah,
I would say the biggest adjustment in the game, probably that was successful, was the Chiefs went to a look that they hadn't shown all year, which was they went to an RPO look that Mahomes used to run in college at Texas Tech, and they felt kind of desperate because they hadn't done anything in the first half, so they went to this college look and basically put the rest of the game in Mahomes' hands. It was up to him whether he was going to pass, run, take it himself, give it to Pacheco. They gave him all the options, and he just went up to the line and on every play made his decision what he was going to do. So it was a really interesting adjustment. They hadn't shown that look all year, and it was very obvious the 49ers were not ready for it.
Well, I think it's hard to say because they didn't have their regular their alignment for the Super Bowl. They went to their alignment they had a lot of this year, especially in games where they were not very effective. So I think that's why Wilkes got fired yesterday, was the performance of the team in the second half because of his adjustments. I don't know if he made the adjustments or Shanahan did, but whoever made the calls definitely made some errors and miscalculations. And I got to think it was him if he got let go today or yesterday.
Although you have to think it feels a little bit like they're scapegoating him for what really was a team loss in the second half. But
there was no.
I'm not saying he didn't deserve it. I'm just saying it feels a little bit like, he's the one guy who gets the axe from what was really a catastrophic loss. They really should have won this year, I think.
Halftime adjustments for the Niners were basically offensively terrible, throw nonstop, and defensive and throw downfield. So it was right for having
and not run the guy who could have been the MVP running back. We're just not
hurried
on the third one.
Purdy hurried on every play, and on defense, switching to a zone and trying to blitz Mahomes. These were huge mistakes that cost them pretty much the game because you could feel the momentum switching and it allowed them to just hang around. And you don't want to play Mahomes in overtime. You just don't.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit about the hot mic moment that they caught the ref talking about right towards the end of the game, and he didn't know he was on a hot mic, but he basically said, "You can't give Mahomes that much time," and just for the refs to even recognize that,
it was obvious.
Right before he took the ball down the field and won the game. So
at the beginning of the third quarter, you had 3 straight possessions, 3 and out for the Niners, and there were, out of 9 plays, there were 8 throws and 1 run. And 3 straight 3 and outs was pretty much the difference in the game because it allowed them to start to make these adjustments. And it took away, if you look at the stats, the reason why KC beat the Niners in every category was simply because they didn't really play in the third quarter. It was almost like the offense took a quarter off.
Well, their first 3 possessions were 3 and outs in the second half. So yeah, something went wrong there with the 49ers.
Well, it was the entire third quarter. Mm-hmm. So I mean, the entire third quarter they did nothing offensively, and that cost them a lot. And really, it started to shake their confidence. And then at the end of that was when the Chiefs. Remember, the Chiefs weren't doing very much either.
No.
So a lot of times we're sitting here focusing on how great the Chiefs did to win. Really, it was a really tight game where the defenses were overpowering the offenses, and going into overtime, let's face it, 19-19 at the end of regulation. And then Patrick Mahomes does his thing in overtime. But that third quarter where you could tell that both teams were getting frustrated, and San Fran was more frustrated than they had been because they just kept punting, and they knew we can't keep giving him the ball back like this. And then at the end of that whole stretch, the Chiefs punt to San Fran, it goes off the guy's leg, and within a play, they're in the end zone. They basically gifted the Chiefs a touchdown.
That's right.
And so that was more frustrating. So then the Niners had to come back, and then.
So I think we both can agree that the better adjustments were made on the defensive side for the Chiefs. Spagnuolo, who's one of the best defensive coordinators in football. A lot of people were saying maybe he was the MVP of the game. I mean, just the game he called in the second half was pretty amazing. And then on the offensive side, you had Andy Reid who did 2 adjustments. One, he gave Patrick Mahomes the complete ability to run the offense as he saw it through an RPO system. But then he also figured out a way to scheme open the best tight end in football, who had 1 catch for 1 yard, and in the second half went completely off. And he did it. They were showing the breakdowns of film. He basically started doing drag plays with him and finding ways to pick. He would have Noah Gray come across or different receivers come across and pick off the guy who was trying to follow Kelsey. And Kelsey was wide open on a lot of those plays. So, a lot of good adjustments at halftime. I think there's no question that the Chiefs won that battle, and that's what I predicted last week.
I think it was bad adjustments by the Niners that allowed a lot of those exploitations to happen. I basically said in our last podcast that if I were the Niners, I would number one, take away Chris Jones, double him, triple him, whatever you got to do.
Mhm.
I would take away Travis Kelce, double him with your best guys, whatever. And I would limit. I would definitely be aware of Pacheco, but I would make sure that the pocket collapsed in such a way that you weren't giving Mahomes a lot of room to shoot out of there. So keep him in the pocket. And none of those things happened in the second half. Travis Kelce went crazy. He ended up with 93 yards and almost nothing in the first half. Chris Jones went wild. He got 4 tackles, 2 quarterback hits, 6 pressures, and he was averaging under 2.5 seconds to get to the quarterback.
I know.
So he
It
went
was
crazy.
unbelievable. Yeah.
They were trying to block him one-on-one, and then that pivotal play at the end where Purdy had to throw it away. Purdy had
Right.
2 wide open receivers,
I know.
both touchdowns, and he just couldn't get the ball off because Chris Jones came up untouched.
Mhm.
So that's a complete failure on scheme. I really think that the reason Wilkes is not with them anymore is because of the way he called the second half, which allowed the geniuses with the headsets on the Chiefs side to say they're in zone. Kelsey's going to sit down in this zone and get 10-yard chunks. We're going to exploit the zone. I mean,
Yeah.
nobody does it better than Mahomes beating a zone. And then,
Yep.
they're going to blitz now. Cool. Wherever the blitz came from, he always threw the ball immediately to that receiver or that check down running back or whoever was in the space where the blitzer came from.
Right.
And, and then the defensive Spagnuolo basically started blitzing every time they sent somebody in motion because they pretty much gambled that it was always going to be a throwing play. So, it was I really think it was more San Fran's lack of reasoning behind their adjustments. I think they were just poor adjustments. They didn't need to adjust very much at all. Because I think if you had stayed with McCaffrey, he would have started busting some bigger runs. I think they would have eaten more clock off the game clock, and they would have put Mahomes in a worse position than he was in, where he was never down very much, and all he needed to do was get it tied up. So I think adjustments. It's kind of tough to say Reed did all these great adjustments. He could have if he had needed to. I don't think they really needed to do very much. I think they just needed to let the Niners shoot themselves in the foot, basically.
I agree.
With poor coverages and throwing every down right into the teeth of the best part of KC's defense.
Let's talk about the matchup. So to me, the quarterback matchup, Mahomes won the quarterback matchup. If you look at the whole game,
Yes.
He was frustrated in the first half, but clearly he won the quarterback matchup. I'm not saying Purdy wasn't good; he was good, but Mahomes was great, or in some cases otherworldly when it came to the overtime 8 for 8, just basically perfect. I'd say the coaching matchups, Reed and Spagnuolo clearly were the better coaches on both sides of the ball.
By a mile.
I would say the tight end matchup was clearly won by Kelce. Kittle was, he did block, but he was basically invisible the whole game. I don't know what happened.
They weren't using him.
Such a huge part of that offense, and they just didn't even go to him at all. So Kelce won the tight end matchup. I'd say running back matchup, McCaffrey, just because he's so great. I think they didn't use him enough, especially in the second half. I don't know what happened. He just disappeared. But overall, he was the better back than Pacheco. And then when you look at the wide receivers for the 49ers as a group, they had fewer catches than Travis Kelce did total. So to me, the 49er wide receiver group didn't show up either in this game. It was just so confusing to me.
Because Purdy was under duress. He was being asked to hold the ball too long, and he was pretty effective at getting it out of there and not getting intercepted. I think most quarterbacks under that much pressure would have actually given up the ball at least 2 or 3 times. And I think he's actually very skilled. I'm not sure why he didn't run a few times, but I feel like he was really trying to get his guys involved, which he had done all year long. But I think without really establishing the run in the first half effectively, the passing lanes were not there in the second half. And so to try and throw when they've got your running back on the shelf and they have the best corners, you're not going to have success. And that's really why they had 3 straight punts. And then if you look at the game line, it was punt, 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 field goal, field goal, field goal, touchdown, field goal, blocked kick, etc. So it's just it was a lot of mediocrity on offense.
So then for the MVP, Patrick Mahomes wins it again, 3-time MVP, 3-time Super Bowl winner now. You think he should have won it, or was there somebody else who was more deserving in this game?
I think the most valuable person was probably Spagnuolo. But
Yeah.
I think Chris Jones was almost as important as Mahomes. Getting all those pressures, especially on third down. Purdy converted 3 third downs. And that's a function of pressure. He wasn't missing wide open guys. He was running for his life and throwing to a space, hoping his guy could get there.
Right.
Throwing way before he wanted to on almost every play. So
I think
MVP,
if he had won the MVP, if Chris Jones had won the MVP, I would have been fine with it. I think that, I'm fine with Mahomes winning it too. He was otherworldly in the second half and overtime. But I would say the X factor was Chris Jones. I mean, he just was such a difference maker. He just pops off the page when it comes to the difference he makes on defenses.
I will be honest that there was one piece of the Chiefs defense that I was pleasantly surprised with, which was their defensive line. Their interior tackles, they were beasts. McCaffrey was getting stoned when he was trying to run up the middle.
And Karlaftis, nobody talks about Karlaftis. He's the other D end, and he's coming on.
It wasn't the ends really though. It was the tackles. The D tackles were solid. They were shedding blocks. Even Williams was getting thrown to the ground sometimes, and the guy would stone the runner after throwing Williams to the ground. So I think the coaches saw this and said, my goodness, we've got to throw because McCaffrey can't keep getting pounded like that. Honestly, it wasn't even very many times that he got stoned, but it was enough times to be a psychological impact that I feel like they said, well, let's let Purdy try and get our receivers going. I was very impressed with the defensive line of the Chiefs. I feel like I would have personally stayed with McCaffrey and tried to pound it, and knowing that over the years, all the great ones had a lot of times where they'd have 3 yards, 4 yards, no gain, 3 yards, and then they bust a 30-yarder or a 70-yard touchdown. That's what McCaffrey brings, is that ability to bust it when you catch the defense in a bad look. And I feel like if you stay with that long enough, he's going to make those kind of impact plays. And while you're running the clock down and taking away possessions. So
did you notice the rest of the Kansas City defense has so much confidence? Karlaftis, Jones, and the interior guys all have so much confidence because they know those corners are so locked down. I mean, I've never seen coverage that tight in my life.
I agree. That's why it was so inexcusable that they just kept calling for long, not bombs or anything, but 15-yard throws on so many plays because I felt like the Niners guys were not winning their battles, and I don't understand why they just stayed with that and actually got worse into it. They weren't understanding that this isn't working. Let's try something else. So anyway.
All right, well, let's talk about the plays of the game. Tell me your top 3 or 4 plays of the game. And just to quote George Kittle, who talks about, the big Mo, the momentum is real and that it can come down to a couple plays in the entire game that decides it. What were your biggest plays of the game?
I think the biggest plays of the game were the punt that went off the guy's leg and basically handed the Chiefs a free touchdown.
To me, that was the number one biggest play of the game.
Me too. Yeah. Because it would have been
it was 10-6, and then that went to 13-10, just like that.
Yep. And so now San Fran's behind and having to kind of struggle to get back, and that was a psychological impact, a momentum swinger. The other one is the blocked extra point. And then the third one I think happened at the end of regulation, where not at the end of regulation, but towards the end, where Purdy had the two open receivers, and Chris Jones came up untouched on third down and forced them to kick a field goal.
And also the blitz by the other corner who came in and did the same thing on a drive before that. They had two different plays that were blitzes right up the middle, and he had no chance.
But for me,
to me, both of those plays are huge because
for me, having a corner trick you and come out of nowhere is not as inexcusable,
right,
as Chris Jones going untouched. That he should have gotten
but if
touched by
Jones
two guys.
But if Jones didn't get home and if McDuffie didn't get home on those two plays, then both of them would have been a first down or a touchdown. You know what was interesting? Purdy said after the game, he said, you have to understand those last couple field goals that we kicked in regulation and overtime, the entire season, though, those had been touchdowns. And he said, I just feel so bad for the guys because we didn't convert those to touchdowns like we've been doing all year. And he said, this Kansas City defense somehow found a way to stop us in the red zone. And this is what I called out last week. Again, what went right, what went wrong. One of the things I said was I thought it would be a lot of movement between the 20s and a lot of bogging down in the red zone and a lot of field goals. And that's exactly what happened.
I think it comes down to whether you establish McCaffrey running the ball. That opens up your passing lanes. If you don't establish McCaffrey, you don't get open passing lanes against guys that are actually better at getting the ball in the air than your guys almost. The corners for the Chiefs said they wanted Purdy to be throwing the ball. They did not want to have to face McCaffrey running the ball.
No
so
doubt.
The fact that they threw the ball 38 times and McCaffrey carried 22, 6 of which were in overtime, meaning
question.
he ran the ball 16 times during regulation and almost none in the second half, really tells you that they didn't establish the run. And so if you had told me that McCaffrey's not going to get this run established, I wouldn't have thought that the Niners could win. So I'm not surprised by the result.
So you named the top 4 plays in the game, in my opinion. I agree. I think the 5th biggest play in the game wasn't even a football play. It was actually at the coin flip in overtime when the 49ers players admitted later they didn't even know the overtime rules. And Warner elected immediately to take the ball. Later, Shanahan was trying to explain that he was hoping that if they ended up with a second possession in overtime and both had scored, that he wanted the third possession. That was his explanation. But somebody else was saying that they didn't want to say this, but that his defense was really, really tired at the end of the game. And a lot of people think he took the ball because he was trying to buy time for his defense to rest. So I don't know what the real story is, but I think everyone in the NFL agrees that it was a strategic mistake. You make sure with the new overtime rules, which are just 2 years old, you always take the ball second now, and you make sure you see what the other team does.
Yeah, I think Shanahan was genuine in his rationale. I think it's been overblown about the players saying they knew the overtime rules, etc. If the Chiefs were so aware and had been so trained perfectly, why did Hardman, who caught the winning touchdown, not even know that he had won? You know what I mean? Like, I think there was plenty of confusion. I don't think it was one-sided. Mecole Hardman did not know he won the game until Mahomes came over.
Right.
So that tells you that this was a new experience for everybody. And I think it's been wildly overblown about how one side's coach didn't prepare his team, the others did. I think there's a narrative there that they're just looking for things to support that.
Possibly,
I don't really believe that. I do think it was a huge error. And I think this was the first time it was tested out. And I do think that you're a fool thinking that you're going to get a field goal and let Mahomes go down and get a field goal. And on the third one, that's when you're going to win the game.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing in my mind saying giving Mahomes a shot at scoring a touchdown that he's not going to.
The reason the narrative sticks a little bit is because you're looking at Shanahan get frustrated year after year after year with the best roster, right? And everyone's trying to figure out why he doesn't have a ring yet. And everyone looks at the Kansas City Chiefs and the New England Patriots, who script everything out meticulously before the game. And in 2 weeks, they really scripted out. And they've talked about every scenario, and they've gone over every type of down and yardage. It's almost like war gaming for these guys who are very detail-oriented folks. And the rub on Shanahan is he's not that way, and he doesn't talk to his players that way. So that's the only reason the narrative sticks.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is that narrative's not fair, I think. I have plenty of criticisms on Shanahan. He has 3 Super Bowl double-digit deficit, where he had the advantage, double-digit losses, where in the second half he has a double-digit lead, I should say, because he abandons the run in the big game. Not all season. All season they have tremendous wins because he stays with the run, and then they start doing play action, and he starts to zip it all over the yard with all these great receivers and tight end options. But in the Super Bowl, for some reason, he abandons the run at halftime, and what happens is the other team gets more possessions. You become one dimensional, which lets the other team tee off and start either holding you to 3 and outs or maybe get turnovers. And you start to feel the momentum slipping away from you, and that's poor coaching. And so I think Shanahan needs to look at what he does at halftime adjustments in big games. Maybe his halftime adjustments during the season are fine, but for some reason he overthinks it in the Super Bowl and thinks that he needs his quarterback to be the MVP of the game, and
Right.
he needs to stand back there and gun it all over the field. Doesn't matter how much pressure he's under, and we're not going to give him very many dump off passes to keep the guys honest with screens and things like that. He never called any of that. He was just straight bang, 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 3 and outs, and giving Mahomes the ball again. And I don't think it's not an accident that he's lost 3 this way now. He's definitely a great offensive mind, but I don't know that he's a good strategic football coach.
Do you put him into the same categories like the McDaniels of the world and some of the younger guys, these young guns who like to sling it, but maybe get out coached in the big game with the real old guys? That's what it looks like to me.
That's what happened to the Dolphins several times this year against really good opponents. They decided to go away from everything that had worked in the games where they're slaughtering bad teams. And really, you don't have to go away from the things that work. You just have to realize it's going to be harder and lower scoring. You're not going to beat somebody 70 to whatever. You're going to beat a team 31-21, or 28-17 or something. But I think that said a lot about Shanahan's error, thinking about what are we going to do on our third possession in overtime instead of focusing on, you want to go second because let's face it, if you go down, if your opponent goes first and scores a touchdown and you're going down to score a touchdown, a lot of teams are going to go for 2 and try and win, and that's what I would do.
In the end, all you can do is tip your hat
to winning.
All you can do is tip your hat to Andy Reid and Mahomes, Kelsey, and this core of players that has found a way to get 3 rings, 2 rings after Tyreek Hill left for the Dolphins, by the way, which to me I didn't think was possible, but somehow they find a way to win. So let's talk. Let's wrap up with the stats of the game. So I'm going to talk about game stats. I'm going to talk about each of the individual stats. For team stats, we had total yards: Kansas City 455, San Francisco 382. So that did surprise me a little bit. I did expect Kansas City to narrowly win this game, but I thought that San Francisco would outgain them yard-wise. Any surprise there?
Not based on what they had called for a halftime adjustment game plan. They basically took the third quarter off. So those stats are kind of misleading in terms of what could have happened. But not really. I think it was, if you look all the way down the line, there's only a couple stats that jump out. Most of them are pretty even. Turnovers and all that stuff. It's all even. It's just giving
Kansas City slightly on passing yards. You have Kansas City slightly on rushing yards, although 66 of those were Mahomes, which was very surprising, of course, because of
that
the
was
RPO.
Significant.
Yeah.
That was significant because Pacheco only had the 59 yards carrying, 3.3 yards per carry.
Right.
He was not effectively moving the chains. So Mahomes had to do it himself, and that's
Casey had a slightly better average yards per play, which, makes sense. You had, like you said, turnovers were 2-2, so there was no advantage there. Sacks, Kansas City 3 and the 49ers 1. That surprised me. With the first half the 49ers had, they only got to him 1 time.
Yeah, Mahomes was good at getting the ball out of there when he was about to get sacked. I think Purdy was too, but there were moments where he really wanted to try and hang in there and make that play, let that play develop.
Right.
I think San Fran, if you're going to throw the ball a lot, they had to have more checkdowns than what I saw.
Hmm.
I think they basically did not set Purdy up for success.
Hmm.
That's why I feel like if you look at a lot of the plays he made, they were pretty good. He's a good quarterback, you know.
But what about his whole comment about, we always convert those to touchdowns and in this game it was all field goals? Like, do you put that on the 49ers or do you give the Chiefs some credit for bogging some of those drives down?
Well, I definitely give the Chiefs credit. They got a lot of pressure. They were doing masterful job of mixing up blitzes. Um, San Fran, some of their linemen buckled a few times.
Hmm.
The KC defensive tackles were very strong and stout. So I was very impressed with them. Chris Jones went off the reservation. I mean,
He did.
his stats are great, but his stats don't tell the whole story.
They don't.
He was a game wrecker.
He affects
And
almost every play. It's amazing.
he had hurries. He had hurries. And that's when you've got Purdy throwing it at the feet of Ayuk and throwing it over the head of other receivers.
Mhm.
They weren't doing that all season. So it's because he wasn't hurrying that much all season. So
Well, the biggest team stat of the game was third down efficiency. You had Kansas City at 47%, basically converting half their third downs. San Francisco at 25%. They were 3 for 12. Um, what are your thoughts there? I mean, you can't win a Super Bowl game going 25% on third down
so
efficiency.
so they were asking Purdy to throw too many times when it was 3rd and 8 or 3rd and 12. And Mahomes was asked to do a lot of the same things, but he would scamper for the first down. So I think that was one piece of this that really kept drives alive. But they were effective at getting third downs, mostly because Mahomes was really good on third down, and Purdy was not. But mostly it was because the pressure they were getting. Spagnuolo brought blitzes on third downs,
Yep.
especially, and they
Like
had
you
no
said,
answer
I
for
mean,
it.
like you said, Spagnuolo could have been the MVP of this game. I mean, just the way he called
Yeah.
that second was a really
Yep.
amazing watch.
For some reason, he knew that they were not going to have check downs. They were not going to use Kittle. It was straight up, go get him, and we're going to cover these two wide receivers with our lockdown corners, and Purdy's going to have nowhere to go.
And
And
there were guys like Shannon Sharp and Stephen A. Smith and others this week that were saying one of the reasons for that is because he's young, he's in his second year, and you have to dumb down or simplify the game plan a little bit for a younger guy. I don't know if that's true, but that's their
no,
opinion.
in my
Uh,
opinion, it was completely bad game plan. Poor design of plays that were not conducive to a team that has really good corners. I mean, it's
yeah,
just that simple.
you got to go underneath.
And by the way, not only do they have good corners, but you got Chris Jones rushing your quarterback
You should have had McCaffrey and Kittle all day long. Those
all day
two
long,
all day
all the
long.
way down the field until they played a little bit softer and by the way, that would open up the linebackers to give running lanes for McCaffrey. So it was just poor game plan resulted in more yards for the Chiefs. Even though the score was tied at the end of regulation, so you got to say that there was no huge advantage anywhere.
So looking at the individual stats, we got the Kansas City Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes, 34 for 46, 333 yards, 2 touchdowns, and INT. The INT was a pretty bad one. I thought that was his worst play of the day. He just kind of threw it up. He was hoping the guy could get there, but it wasn't. It wasn't the kind of play you usually expect from Mahomes in a big game. Overall,
No, but
though,
it
he
was in the
had he
middle
had
of the
MVP,
field.
he had
It was in the
MVP
middle of the
stats.
field where it wasn't terribly damaging.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah. And then he had 9 carries for 66 yards, which was probably the biggest shock of the whole game. If you're going to pinpoint one thing that you didn't think he was going to do, is get 66 yards on 9 carries. Really, he was more effective than Pacheco, and Pacheco had 18 carries for 59 yards. So
the
uh,
biggest surprise for me was Kelsey getting 9 catches for 93 yards.
yeah,
I mean,
okay.
I just can't believe they would allow him to beat them like that. To
9 carries for
to
93
keep
yards.
those chains moving and to keep drives going. If there's anything you've seen all year, he was their number one weapon, and no one was even close in second. So
And at halftime, he had 1 catch for 1 yard.
yeah, they had a much better game plan defensively in the first half. But they schemed him open nicely, but really the Niners defensive game plan in the second half played perfectly into Mahomes and Kelsey's hands, and it opened up all kinds of other things
But
and allowed Mahomes to run.
the other thing they did in the second half, and it shows on the stat sheet here, Mahomes hit 9 different receivers in that game. He hit, Kelsey, Hardman, Watson, Rice, Pacheco, Gray, Valdez, Scantling, McKinnon, and Richie James. So, he had 9 different receivers catch a ball. That tells me he's spreading the ball around.
They know how to go to soft spots in the zone. The Chiefs are great at it. And when they blitzed him, he was always throwing to the spot that the blitzer came from. That's how you punish a blitz. Brady loved getting blitzed. Mahomes loves getting blitzed. The dumbest thing you can do is blitz frequently and when they're expecting it. It's just it's going to be a bad day. And, even though it's overblown to criticize when it was really pretty close. I mean, it's 1919 at the end of regulation.
Yep.
You really needed to not have it go into overtime with Patrick Mahomes. You needed to be up 2 scores with 2 minutes left. You needed to be putting those points up there and holding them and not letting them keep getting field goals to keep themselves alive.
So looking over the 49ers stats, you had Purdy 23 for 38. He was just over 50% throwing. A lot of that because of the pressure in the second half.
All of it.
255 yards and a touchdown. Decent numbers, but that's not Super Bowl MVP winning numbers. It's just not.
Neither of them were particularly spectacular during the regulation. Purdy was 69.8 QBR, which is way below his 113 average for the year. He led the league by a long way. And Mahomes was 75.8. So Mahomes was only a little bit higher than Purdy in QBR. That wasn't the difference. The difference was get to overtime, give the ball to Mahomes, and he does what he does. I mean, that was really
He was 8 for 8 in overtime.
Yeah. And by the way, the Niners had a great game plan in overtime to pound McCaffrey and then dink and dunk. And it was the first time in that whole second half that they looked like themselves. And then they got all the way down to the 9-yard line and stopped running.
And they had that fateful play in overtime where Chris Jones comes up the middle completely unblocked.
Yep. Unblocked.
He said even he was surprised by it. And you had 2 running completely open. It would have been a touchdown, game over.
Poor scheme. Yep. There were literally 2 guys in the end zone who were open. And so that's a matter of not having time. If one running back had been in there to chip Chris Jones, that was a touchdown.
So then rushing, you had Christian McCaffrey, 22 carries for 80 yards. Purdy had 3 carries for 12 yards. He actually beat that player prop of 11.5 yards, beat it by half a yard. Elijah Mitchell, 2 for 8. Deebo Samuel, 3 for 8. So nobody else really had much else. Juszczyk got a carry. So it's all Christian McCaffrey. Even on the receiving side, Christian McCaffrey had 8 receptions for 80 yards as well, and a touchdown. So he had a total of 160 yards offense. Brandon Ayuk with 3 catches, Jennings with 4, Deebo with 3. Overall pretty pedestrian numbers for most of them except for McCaffrey.
Yeah, it was a tough day to be running routes and looking back and seeing your quarterback getting hurried, and the guy who's covering you almost is acting like he knows where you're going, kind of thing. And I can't say enough about the Chiefs secondary. They impressed me a lot. And I really felt like going into this game, I wasn't sure how good they were because I think they played a lot of bad teams. They lost to some good teams, but they only beat bad teams for the most part, except for my Dolphins. But they were for real. They were very strong, very, very. They were fast. They had good hands. They were in their hip pocket. I mean, there was nobody open, and they were really a huge part of why the Chiefs made the Niners look pedestrian.
All right, so let's wrap this up. Biggest thing you were right about from last week, and biggest thing you were wrong about this game.
Um, biggest thing is basically if it's close, advantage Chiefs. If it's a lot of scoring, especially in one direction, it's going to be advantage Niners.
I agree with you on that as well. Yep.
Yeah, and I knew that was going to hinge a lot on running the ball. Whether it's working or not, you had to run the ball. And Shanahan's known for doing that. So what I've seen now after looking at some of his Super Bowl performances is he kind of overthinks it and gets away from that. And that's kind of his downfall. So running McCaffrey allows a lot of that passing lanes to open up. That wasn't going to happen if you weren't committed to the run. So I'm not. I think that was entirely how I saw it.
I think the biggest thing I was right about, I almost nailed the score, and that you just don't go against Hall of Fame coach, Hall of Fame quarterback. I just felt like they would get it done. I didn't know how, but I just felt like in the end, you give them the ball last, they would figure out a way to get it done, whether it was with a kick or something else. So I was right about that. What the biggest thing I was wrong about was, I think, the use of Kittle really surprised me. I thought he was going to have as big a game as Kelsey did. I thought they both were going to have big stat lines. So,
Well, it wasn't that you were wrong. It was that the game plan didn't really call for him to get the ball for some reason, which that was a mistake. I think the biggest thing I was wrong about was I underestimated how stout the defensive line for the Chiefs was.
mhm.
They were a difference maker in the game. So you had the defensive line really putting pressure on every play, and you had the secondary blanketing the receivers. And if you're going to throw every down, you're in trouble in that scenario.
I think the 49ers defense played great in the first half. Even Chase Young
Yeah.
had a big game. He had
In
a
fact,
sack and
they had a tremendous amount of pressure on Mahomes in the second half, but he started to run out of there and he started to get more yards running. One stat that I found interesting, I'm hearing a lot of conspiracy theories online, which are always interesting because they kind of make you chuckle and say, maybe, but no.
yeah.
But some of the conspiracies about the league wanted the Chiefs to win and all this stuff really I felt was ridiculous. But there is one that's interesting, and that's the Chiefs in the last 3 Super Bowls have had 0 holding penalties. And I feel like that's not really a conspiracy. I do feel like the refs are told, try not to be a factor. We want this decided on the field. And so I think they're letting things like holding kind of go a little bit.
The 49ers fans were furious. They pointed out a couple of ones that they really felt.
I saw quite a number of videos where they were absolutely holding, but especially Bosa, but more than Bosa. And I don't want to be, a guy that says this was decided by the refs, but it is interesting. And I think future teams should understand that your offensive line is going to be able to hold a little bit in the Super Bowl. I think that's just going to be a fact. And, hey, the Niners should have too. I mean,
a lot of the Pro Bowl linemen, Mark Schlereth said a couple of weeks ago, he said that there's holding on every play. It's just whether they call it or not.
Yeah, but some's egregious. If you have the arm around the neck and you're riding him around the edge, just like I saw a bunch of those, and it certainly was not the difference in the game.
Mm-hmm.
But because I'd still see Bosa get there to pressure most of the time, and Mahomes would throw it away, so. I mean, there was still an impact, but and who knows? Bosa could have gotten there, and Mahomes could have juked him and run for a 20-yard first down. You don't know, but it's just interesting that the Chiefs haven't had any holding penalties in 3 Super Bowls, and I don't remember too many holding penalties. There were penalties, and actually, for the conspiracy theorists that say that the NFL wanted the Chiefs to win, nothing held up like that. Like, for instance, the Chiefs had more penalty yardage than the Niners. How do you explain that and stuff? So I don't buy into any of that, but there are some interesting conversations about some of the holding that was going on. But
well, it was a really great game, very competitive, exciting to watch. I think a lot of people even like the halftime show. So, but great game, great teams, great coaches, great players, and excited for next season. That's a wrap for this season. So really fun breaking it down with you, Rob, and from the sports guys. We're wrapping up the NFL season. We will be covering other NFL news throughout the spring. We'll be looking at the NFL draft that's coming up. We're going to be looking at some of the off-season acquisitions some of the teams are going to make, and there's always stuff to talk about when it comes to the NFL, even in the off season. So last question for you, Robbie. Your Miami Dolphins in 2024, how are they looking? Are you feeling good? What do they need to acquire to try to get better?
I think they need a little more depth on defense. And I think offensively, they need to be a little more creative with the weapons they have. I think that they got way too pass happy to Tyreek Hill. When you have speedsters all over the team, it's inexcusable to lock in on one receiver. But I think offensively they'll get that done. I think McDaniel's going to learn a lot from this season. And defensively, they're going to get some of their guys back. You know, they had some really devastating injuries. And they need to add a few more young pieces on defense, especially linebacker. And maybe one more edge rusher would be nice. Losing your main edge rusher, probably your best defender, in Phillips, was pretty devastating.
You think they can get over the hump with the Bills this year?
Yeah, I think the Bills have some pieces that I would exploit. I think the game plan, it was a lot like watching San Fran in the second half here. I think McDaniel changes his game plan entirely when he plays the Bills. I don't know why. He goes to a pass every down scheme, and Tua is running for his life. And I don't think that defense is superior. I think you can definitely attack it in a balanced way and beat them. But
he perceives the strength of the Buffalo defense to be their rushing defense, and maybe he's trying to exploit what is kind of a weaker secondary. I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, the way you open up the throwing lanes is you got to run the ball first.
That's
I mean, the Dolphins were definitely one of the top running teams in the NFL, and they had a 1-2 punch that was probably the best in the NFL, and they didn't use it at all times, especially in the big games. So that was strange. But I'll leave you with one stat. Mahomes has the most playoff wins, the most TDs, the most yards, most Super Bowl MVPs in a first 7 years of a career.
I know, it's amazing.
So
even better than Tom.
Yeah, people are likening this to Tiger Woods and Jack Nicklaus. Tiger Woods started out so hot and so fast that they thought he was going to crush every one of Nicklaus's records.
Right.
And I think that remains to be seen, because I think he really got to. Tiger started having his body break down on him. I think you have to just let time play out to see if this trajectory continues. If it continues, he's definitely the greatest of all time. At a young age, he's the greatest of all time so far. And so we'll see. I think that's a really interesting stat. And he got his third double-digit deficit comeback in the Super Bowl. There are only 4 others like that. So he's definitely breaking traditions and rules and rules.
If you think about it, there's only 2 quarterbacks that have beaten him in a big game, and one of them is the greatest of all time. Tom Brady beat him as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback.
Yeah.
And then the other one was Joe Burrow knocked him out of the AFC Championship game a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes a Herculean effort, and it takes an elite quarterback playing at an elite level to beat Mahomes. It just does. Yeah. And as good as I think Purdy did play, I don't think he was horrible. You look at his stat line and you look at the game, and I've watched it back twice now. He didn't play at an elite level, not good enough to knock him off.
I'm not sure anybody really would have played well in the system they were calling for, with the pressure that Kansas City was bringing.
I'm not saying he can't. I'm just saying he didn't.
No, I know he didn't, and the reason really was, I think, more about scheme than anything else. I can't imagine a quarterback who could have done a lot better with the limitations that were put on him, and the poor game plan in the second half.
And basically no running game in the second half. no running game.
Almost nothing. And so the DBs knew that it was up to them to stay close and not even worry about having to think about McCaffrey running wild. So
to wrap up, my Carolina Panthers, sitting at 2-15, there's only one direction to go, and that's up. And they've hired a really young mind, offensive coach like a McDaniels, like a Shanahan in Canales, and we'll see what he can do. He did a lot of good for the Bucs this year with Baker kind of resurrecting his career. So we'll see what he can do with Bryce Young. And they do have a number 5 overall defense. So they've got some foundation there. They need a bunch of pieces. They need some offensive line. They need wide receivers. They probably need another running back. A lot of things, another pass rusher. But feel pretty good about this young guy coming in. You got to give him 3 years to build what's a pretty empty cupboard on the offensive side. So we'll see.
Sometimes when you have a new voice, it's easy to get the guys to rally around it and to kind of feel like we're in the boat together and all that stuff. They just need to really rebuild in terms of address the offensive and defensive lines first. I mean, they thought they had a premier offensive line. That's why they went and drafted a quarterback. They thought, okay, now we can protect him. And they were wrong. I mean, it played real poorly last year. And so giving up the farm to get this smaller sized quarterback, who I think will be pretty good in the league, but they shouldn't have given up the farm like they did. And then to turn around and watch your offensive line not be as good as you thought it was, when the year before it was ranked very highly. With the same guys, you basically take a step backward. That was unpredictable. So that really
he resurrected Baker's career, who's a 6-foot quarterback, like Bryce, who's a shorter quarterback. He also, before Baker, resurrected Geno Smith's career in Seattle. So he's kind of got a specialty to pick up these guys who everyone's given up on and kind of find a way to get these smaller quarterbacks to be effective. So we'll see what he can do. Anyway, we're going to wrap there. It's been an exciting season. I know all of us football fans are excited for next year, and we're kind of entering the desert now the next 6 months with no football, but we can just get excited about what's coming. And we have a lot of other good sports episodes coming your way on a lot of other topics, and we're excited about that. If you think of anything you want us to cover, put it in the comments down below, and we would love to have it in the future show. So thanks a lot, Robin. We'll see you guys next time.
See you.